Hello, class. Today we will be covering Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is all about media. And what I mean about media is the materials that the artwork is made of. And this has an impact on how we perceive the work. So it's really important to understand what you're looking at. You may not exactly understand possibly the entire process, but just kind of understanding a basics of how it works or how they go about creating that work definitely reinforces the content. So it's important to understand the media. So what we're going to be doing in chapter 3 or covering in chapter 3, we start off with drawing and they go to painting, printmaking, photography, craft, and sculpture. And each section covers kind of old media to more new media. And along the way, I will be showing some videos so you can understand the process a little better. Some of the processes are difficult. I also will be showing a couple of videos, short videos along the way to help you understand a little more about how the artists go about making the work. Okay. So get your notebooks ready and I am going to share screen and start our lecture. Here we go. So when we talk about media, it's commonly thought that the media really doesn't impact the meaning of the work, but in fact, it can impact it greatly. Okay? Let's say this piece by an artist named Nan June Pak. He was a Korean artist who was the first artist, one of the first artists to start using video as a media. And this piece in particular, this is a neon outline of the United States, each individual state, with TV monitors of different types within those states that cover kind of things that you would see happening in those states, like news clips or, kind of things indicative to those states in particular. Like you can see in Idaho, they have potatoes, and in different parts of, places, they've got, things that are more, part of that state. So that being said, when we look at this, and this is called electronic superhighway, you look at this and you understand what he's talking about. He's talking about mass media and, electrical imagery or imagery in some kind of electrical platform submitted to us as people and how that impacts our lives. Okay? If this were a painting, it wouldn't come across the way it does. Okay? It would possibly you'd still get the content or the meaning, but probably not as much as you would in this way. Okay? So understanding the media is vitally important. Now, there's always commentary about what something costs for a work. Okay? And what a lot of people don't consider is how much of that work, the cost of that work goes into materials. The materials making the artwork can be, really expensive depending on what the media is in particular. Even paintings. Paint is quite expensive. So understanding that that is part of that cost is also really important. And that's definitely important in case of this point by this work by Damien Hirst called For the Love of God. This is a titanium cast of a human skull. Okay? This is not an actual human skull. So what he did is he took a human skull and he made a mold of it and cast it in titanium, which is one of the most expensive, platinum, which is one of the most expensive materials or metals there are. And it's covered with over 8,000 diamonds. Though the one in the center being quite large, and that is an actual diamond as well on the forehead. Now the teeth are the actual human teeth. Okay, so he re-implanted the actual teeth into the work. To create this work was several $1,000s just alone, hundreds of thousands of dollars, obviously, just by itself to create this work. The asking price for this was $50 million, which is never sold. But this is kind of the extreme of, you know, materials in creating artwork, and it's still very much, this work's still very much a commentary about how using expensive materials affects an artwork. This is definitely the highest existing or highest cost of existing materials to create an artwork. So definitely a commentary within the art world. Like I said, it's never been sold. He still owns it. Just to kind of buy it, and then the cost of it, just to insure it is a whole other thing. But really understanding just not just the cost or the time of the artist, which is vitally important as well, but also how much the meat and how much of those materials that go into making the artwork cost as well. So when you're talking about materials, it's not just about the what's used, but about the cost of those as well, and how much time and energy it takes to make the artwork. Okay, so let's talk about where artwork, we've talked a little bit about where artwork started. Artwork started with early humans. In the videos that we've watched, they definitely talk about artwork being, the first humans with the Paleolithic people and the Paleolithic, prehistoric Paleolithic period, creating paintings on walls to leave some kind of recorded history of themselves and their lives. Okay. So this is really the first evidence of the creativity of humans, this need and want to leave some kind of visual imagery. So it's definitely, as early as these are found, it's definitely, or as early as these were created, it's definitely, kind of an innate part of our being as humans. Just a few more as an example. This piece we've talked about as well, we've discussed as well in class, but what I want you to look at with this is what it's made on. This is called papyrus, and papyrus was the first malleable writing surface. This was created by the Egyptians out of a plant that is close plentiful in the mouth of the Nile River. And they used it for a lot of things, actually, but specifically to make a malleable writing surface. And what I mean by malleable writing surface is before this, it was all rocks, basically. Rocks, tablets, stone tablets, carvings. They really didn't have anything that was kind of easy to carry or easy to write on. They sometimes wrote on cloth, but that wasn't very, it didn't work very well. So the invention of this was very impactful on life and society in general. Okay. Paper was not invented until, go to something on paper, sorry. Paper was not invented until around 1000 CE by the Chinese. So, and that's Common Era. So almost 3,000 years after this piece was created on papyrus. So the Egyptians created and exported quite a bit of papyrus because it was something that people could write on and then easily carry. So it wasn't difficult to try to deal with. Now, in between papyrus and paper, they did have malleable writing surfaces, or surfaces that weren't stone. They had something called sorry, this is the, oh, that was the right one. I apologize. Something called vellum. Okay. Vellum is basically stretched and dried animal skin. Calf, goat, usually the ones they use the most, or cow. And so what they would do is they would, when butchering the animal, they would save the skin. They went through a process of stretching it and drying it straight and flat, and then they would use that. These are mostly used for old books. If you see a illuminated manuscript or a Bible, a copy of a Bible, those were usually made out of vellum. Basically, it feels like a really heavy paper or cardstock. And you can kind of see the, it's a little transparent, so you can kind of see through it a little bit. Okay. And this was used for several thousands of years as well. When paper was invented in around 1000 CE by the Chinese, it was still very expensive. The process of making paper is very difficult. So it's not as though everybody had stacks and stacks of paper. Handmade paper is very difficult and takes time to make. I will actually post a video for you on making paper so you can kind of see how that process works. And then that way you kind of understand a little bit about the process. It takes a while, even by today's standards with today's machinery, to make paper. So like I said, it wasn't readily available. It was very expensive. So it wasn't like paper we have today. It was most, people who had it, it was wealthy, royalty, the church, and artists sometimes, if they could afford it or if they had a patron paying for their artwork. That was usually, the people who had it. Kind of everyday people still used wax and clay tablets to write on. Stone was still used. So it was, it was something, again, that wasn't easy to make, readily available. What you're looking at with this is we're gonna talk about drawing media first. This is charcoal. This is one of the first drawing medias there was. Just so you understand, in this chapter, I'll talk a little bit about the artwork and the artists, but I won't go into a lot of it because I really want you focusing on the media and understanding the media. So what I'm going to do is I'll show a couple of videos in the lecture, and then I'm going to post videos for you two to watch. Usually, short clips of YouTube videos of somebody using material so you can see how it's used. So then that way you kind of understand the process a little bit. Charcoal is something that's been around since the prehistoric times. It was one of the materials they used. Charcoals is burnt sticks and twigs, and it was basically, people figured out that it left really dark marks on paper and walls and things like that. So it was used as kind of a dye for things, paint, different types of paint or pigment for different things. Quite often and for a very long amount of time. Artists used it for a good amount of time and still do, actually. Charcoal's still very common because you get really lovely darks with it. Okay? When you push harder with it, you get really beautiful darks. And yes, you can get that with a graphite pencil as well, but charcoal has a deeper effect to it. The problem with charcoal is it's really smudgy. So it's hard to get it to stay in place. Okay. One of the things that artists use when they use charcoal is a piece of paper. Their paper has kind of a roughness to it. It's got little pits in it, kind of little, like little pits. So little places for the charcoal to stay. It's a very heavy, dense paper with a texture to it. And that way it holds the charcoal in a little bit. So artists still use charcoal, been using it since the beginning of humans in cave drawings and paintings, and still used today. Definitely something that's a very popular material. And this is another work that's done in charcoal, so you can just kind of see the range of it. Something that was used very early in early art is something called, when I say early, I'm talking around the, around, 1000 CE, 1100, something that's called a silver stick or a metal point or silver point, a metal point or silver point. This was an actual stick of metal, usually silver, and when dipped into a material that came from trees and then dragged across the paper, it made a mark on the paper that became permanent. Now, this was used at the same time as charcoal. This was a lot more expensive than charcoal. Obviously, a stick of silver is much more expensive than a piece of burnt wood. But the thing with silver point is it doesn't smudge. It's permanent on the paper. Okay. The problem with silver point is that not only is it expensive, but it doesn't have value gradation. So it's a little like drawing with a ballpoint pen. No matter how hard you push with the pen, it doesn't get darker. On the flip side of that, if you push harder with a pencil, it gets darker, or a crayon, it gets darker. Right? But a ballpoint pen just makes a gash in your paper. It doesn't ever get really darker. So if they want to do darks and lights, like with this piece right here, this piece is silver point as well. Let me put both of these up side by side, and then that way it's a little easier. Okay. You'll notice that both of them are pretty light in value. Okay, pretty light in value. There's not really those dense darks. Oh, let me just compare this to the Bertonio piece. Here we go. So you can see with the Bertonio piece, it's very dense and dark. And with the Raphael piece, it's very light in value. So it's drawing of the same thing, a man in, in kind of draped cloth. But this really shows the difference between charcoal and silver point. Okay. If they wanted to pick darker areas with silver point, like right here, where you're seeing these darker recessed areas, that is where they take the silver point and they put lines really close together. That's called hatching. So they put lines very close together. You can also do something called stippling or pointillism, like the point of something. And that's dots. To closer together creates darker areas, farther apart create lighter areas, which is what they've done here. Right? On the face, you can kind of see a little bit of the pointillism used on the face. So it was great. It was a great material to use because it was permanent, but it wasn't great to use because you couldn't really get those really dark darks like artists like to show with drapery and to show roundness and volume. This media is really not used much anymore because of pencils. Okay. This is a piece done in all graphite. Right? All pencils that you've ever used, whether in a stick form with wood around it, with a wood pencil or a mechanical pencil, they are all graphite. Okay? There's never been any lead used in a pencil. It's kind of it's a common misconception. It's very even strange how that term even started. It's graphite. It's a natural mineral that comes out of the earth. Silver point was used for a long time because it was permanent on the paper, but you couldn't get darks and lights with it, and it was expensive. So when graphite was discovered in the 1600s in England, it was revolutionary, not only to the world, but to really the art world. It was revolutionary to everything, really, because all of a sudden you had this material you could push harder to get darks, but also was permanent on the paper. Okay, it didn't smudge away like it smudges, yes, but it didn't smudge away like charcoal does. Okay. Now I know you're thinking this photo or this this looks like, these are all by the same artist, by the way. This looks like a photograph. This is not. Okay. This is showing the range of pencil. Okay. It's showing the range of graphite. Graphite comes in different hardnesses and softness, just like wood does. Okay. So if you ever notice different numbers on pencils, that's what it's referring to, is the hardness or the softness of the graphite. So this artist did a whole series of water using different numbers of pencils to show the range of them and kind of how far you could push them. But the secret is to this, and why it looks like a black and white photograph, is the fact that she really knows how to use shading. And that's what graphite's really great for, okay? Really properly shading. Okay, colored pencil. Okay, colored pencil is pigment mixed with a little bit of glue as a binder and presented in a stick form, just like a regular pencil. Okay. There's a couple of works we're going to look at here. You're probably wondering, wait a minute, how did Sloan get this out of this, out of colored pencil? Okay. High quality color pencils are very, have a lot of pigment in them, and therefore you can really layer with them. And that's how you get good darks and lights in, you know, in your colored pencil work. So that's how both of these works were done. You can see even the drapery and the clothing on the Judy Baca piece on the left. Both are done with colored pencil, but it's really done with heavy shading and really a knowledge of how to understand shading. The last dry drawing media that we'll talk about, and that's what these are, or that we've been looking at, or what's considered dry drawing media, is pastel. Okay? Pastel is a chalk base. So it's pigment, I'm sorry, it can be chalk based or it can be oil based. And it's pigment mixed with either chalk or oil. This is something that comes in a stick form because of the presentation of it. And it's something that you can't get, it's very different because it's very kind of more loose than a colored pencil. It's got a lot more of the pigment in it. So it, you know, and it's not surrounded by wood, therefore it's a lot more loose in its use. And therefore you can use it to get these great colors and blending, but you can't get really strong, intense details. Okay, because it does have a lot of pigment in it. So they're pretty bright and colorful. Both of these works are called At the Milliner by Edward Degas. Degas was an Impressionist artist, and he was mostly known for drawing and painting women and even sculptures of women who were busy doing things and not paying attention to him. So if you ever see kind of this look like a fuzzy, hazy glance, okay, that's kind of what the Impressionist artists were creating. It wasn't meant to look realistic. It was meant to kind of look like the glance out of the corner of your eye. It was, and of women or young girls dancing who aren't looking at the artist, looking at you, the viewer. More than likely it's a Degas work. If you remember, I said in past chapters when we talked about the Impressionist artists that their motivation, they dealt with light and color. So it wasn't about realistic views or making things look overtly realistic, but dealing with light and color and how those different things work at different times of day, different types of lighting. Okay, so definitely pastel worked well for what the Impressionist artists were doing anyway. Really bright, vibrant colors and not a lot of overt, you know, minute details. Both of these work are considered wet drawing media, and what that means is they're ink. Okay? Ink has also been around for a very, very long amount of time. Even the Egyptians used types of ink. And ink is made by a variety of materials or a variation of different materials, including there's a certain kind of beetle that when it's dead, it turns a really intense black. And if they crush it up, they can use that and kind of grind that up into a powder. They can use that as an ink. Certain minerals can be used as an ink. Squid and octopi produce ink. So this was used even when charcoal and silver point were used, but it was also very expensive. So it was permanent in the fact that it dried and was very permanent on the paper, but the problem with that is the expense of it. So it wasn't widely used. Okay. Now there are artists that used it throughout time, and usually, especially with Western art, these were to do prep sketches or kind of prep work or practice work for paintings, which is what you see on the left. This is Elisabetta Sirani. She was a Baroque painter. It's in the 1600s, the Baroque movement. It's Baroque, Baroque, Baroque. And that was a time period when it wasn't common for a woman to be an artist at all. But she was recognized as an artist mainly because of her tenacity and the fact that her father was a well-known artist. Women were not trained as artists. The only way women got trained as artists is if their family members were an artist and they were able to practice kind of and hone their skills with them, because women definitely weren't allowed in art school or allowed to be kind of interns with somebody who was an artist. Okay. So this was very uncommon. Her father was an artist. Her father died and left her family kind of destitute. So she ended up kind of taking his place and working and creating artwork. Unfortunately, most people didn't believe she was actually creating these works herself. She thought that she was paying somebody else to do it. So she outsmarted them and she started working in public so people could watch her. Okay. She ended up dying at kind of a young age as well, tragically, but definitely one of the rare times a woman was noticed at that time in this early of a time period as an artist. Okay. So ink. Okay. Now ink is usually black or mostly black. In the areas that is gray, that means it was thinned down with water to create a wash. So both of these are considered ink and a wash. That's what wash means, is that it's ink mixed with water to kind of create values. This right here, oh, we're missing something. That's not good. This is a work by an artist named Gao Cheng. Gao Cheng uses gunpowder as a drawing media. He considers it a drawing. He usually does these pieces for large, he does firework pieces. So his media is actually firework. So he's definitely considered a motion-based artist. Okay. But he also, when he does these large pieces, he will do what he calls drawings of them. And this is gunpowder sprinkled on paper, and then he lights it where it explodes and leaves the imprint of the burn on the paper. Okay. This piece is a drawing of a piece he did in New York City called Transient Rainbow. And that's the image that's missing, where I can't figure out what it is, where it has gone, which is odd. See if it's in a different place. Nope, it is not. That's so strange. It has decided to remove itself from my lecture. Okay. I'm going to show you a quick video of his work so you can understand how he utilizes gunpowder. So it kind of explains a little bit of how his work is actually created. So I'm going to stop share. And then I'm going to start a video for you. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to share screen and do this video, show you this video. We'll watch it together. And we're not going to watch the whole thing. Obviously, it's 54 minutes. Just the section on him and just the first couple of minutes of it. So you can really kind of get an understanding of how he goes about creating these drawings. And we're going to try that again. I think there wasn't any audio playing. There we go. That should work better. Okay.
My work is sometimes like the poppy flower. It has this almost romantic side, but yet it also represents a poison. Gunpowder. From its very essence, you can see so much of the power of the universe, how we came to be. You can express these grand ideas about the cosmos, very epic and heroic, but at the same time, it's used for such destruction.
这个火药的危险对我来说当然不是一个危险了啊。
Gunpowder possesses a physical danger for anyone who's near it. But with time, you get to know the material.
首先要承认它的。
First, you have to accept that it's uncontrollable, and then work with it. I've worked with the material so long that I've gained an understanding of how it works. My way of doing it is just to flow with the material, to let it take me where it wants me to go.
所以我就是要一直让它使我麻烦和困难。
So I continuously wanted to give me problems, give me obstacles to overcome. This whole process of making drawing is very much like lovemaking. From the very beginning of laying down the paper, it's like laying down the sheets on the bed.
然后我们就开始在设想，今天要怎么做，要怎么做，然后就开始放各种药啊。
And it's a very long process, always working towards the final goal.
小心点射。
And all the time there's this feeling that you just want it to explode, to finish. But you're afraid that maybe it's too early. Maybe it's not the best time yet. Maybe you need to work on it a little more.
而且这些炸了，它都会烧。粉红啊，要是有这种颜色的火药就很漂亮。石头都太轻了啊，还有大一点的石头吗？
And then afterwards, you either have great satisfaction or you have disappointment as to your entire performance. You can talk all day about the ancient philosophies and modern philosophies, art history, criticism, theory, subject matter, historical context, contemporary, postmodernism, form, representation. All these things can be discussed. But in the end, it's really this on-site performance, so to speak, that really makes it work.
So I'm going to stop that there. If you'd like to watch the whole video, or they have a whole series of videos for artists called Art 21. They're done by PBS and they are completely free. So if you Google Art 21, it will pull up a ton of videos of different contemporary artists, and they're all working in their studios. What I really love about them is they're very short videos, kind of 12, 15 minutes, usually, on what artists and how they work, basically, which is interesting to watch. So those he calls drawings, right? And that's really what contemporary art is about this ability to use any material in a very, kind of non-traditional art way. Okay, next section we're going to talk about is printmaking. Now what printmaking is it's creating one artwork or one actual piece and then being able to make duplicates from that. So if you think about printmaking was very early photocopy machine, or a copy machine, basically is what it is, or a printer. That's why they call them printers, is because they print an image. Now, early, this was done obviously by hand without machines, in different ways, shapes, and forms using different materials. The first printed text was something called the Nuremberg Chronicles. And it was a series of images and different bits of information on kind of an encyclopedia about the world up until that point. So up until 1493, in a very kind of limited view of people's, global knowledge. This was a book that was created, and this was the first printed text by printing. And what this means is they made one printing block, and then they were able to make duplicates from that. Okay? This was called a relief printing block. And what a relief printing block is it's usually made of wood, or very early they were made of wood. Now we use different materials. Wood's still used, but they also use different materials. And they carve away at the parts that they want white, left white, and then the block is inked up. That's where these black parts come from. And then paper is laid on it, rubbed into it, and then it's peeled off. And so the positive parts are what is printed. This is exactly like a rubber stamp, right? Exactly like how a rubber stamp works. That is a relief printing block. So these can be very simple. They can be very detailed depending on the level of work that's been done on them. This is a multicolored woodblock print. I love these. There's tons of these. And what they are woodblock prints of woodblock printers doing woodblock prints in their woodblock printing studio. So it's a print of printers printing. Basically. And you can see this is multiple colors, so it doesn't just necessarily have to be white. It doesn't necessarily have to look really kind of heavy lined like, the Nuremberg Chronicles was. It can be very detailed, absolutely. Okay? It takes a long time to make the blocks. It's a very arduous process to even print them, but once you have the printing process started and the carving process finished and the printing process started, then you can get multiples, so it gets easier. Okay? And I'm going to show a video with each one of these processes because it's really hard to describe how this works. With wood, obviously, they're using kind of small chisels. Okay? So I'll show a video now of a relief, how a relief print works, how it's cut, how different parts are created, and then how it's printed.